Hello, I'm Elizabeth Puranam, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, damage caused by hurricanes in the US could cost billions of dollars. Americans are picking up the pieces after 2 devastating storms. But is the federal government doing enough to help them? China and Pakistan have agreed to boost economic ties, but Chinese workers are under attack in the neighbouring nation. So are Beijing's investments benefiting Pakistanis or hurting them? Strikes, layoffs and financial problems. It seems Boeing is lurching from one crisis to another. Can the US plane maker revive its fortunes and reputation? They're expected to cost tens of billions of dollars in damage. Hurricanes Helene and Milton have devastated properties and businesses across the southeastern United States. Climate-linked weather events are becoming more frequent and costly in the nation, draining the federal government's aid funds rapidly. That's while many Americans lack flood insurance or their policies are getting more expensive. The White House has pledged millions of dollars in relief funding for victims, but Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has said the response effort isn't enough. Paul Ging reports.
Hurricane Milton beat a path of destruction across the southeastern United States. Homes were flattened, infrastructure destroyed, and lives were lost. It came right on the heels of Hurricane Helene, which hit the same region. As people take stock of what they've lost, the US government's calculating the cost.
Experts estimate, and it's early estimates, it could be more, it could be less, but estimate that it's caused damages around $50 billion from Hurricane Milton alone. Just alone, $50 billion. We're going to be going to the Congress. We're going to need a lot of help. We're going to need a lot more money as we identify specifically how much is needed.
And before rebuilding, there's the cost of the emergency response. FEMA, the US emergency agency, asked Congress for an additional $20 billion to deal with hurricanes this past month. The agency ran out of money earlier this year, its budget not stretching far enough. US presidential candidate Donald Trump praised the work of local officials, but accused the Biden-Harris administration of mishandling the disaster.
The federal government, on the other hand, has not done what you're supposed to be doing. In particular, with respect to North Carolina, they've let those people suffer unjustly.
The US has been grappling with a growing number of costly natural disasters. At least 20 extreme weather events have cost more than $1 billion in emergency response so far this year. The number of billion-dollar disasters hit 28 in 2023, an all-time high. This beat the previous record of 22, which was set 3 years earlier. Critics say the government needs to put aside more funding and be better prepared for future disasters.
We really need to be understanding that what we've done in the past isn't keeping up. In many cases where we look for insurance to help take care of a lot of these losses, people can no longer get insurance or it's not available. And we're seeing a cost of these disasters accelerating that looking backwards isn't addressing both the financial needs, nor is it addressing the policies that we need to be implementing to at least stop the growth of the cost to the taxpayer while we deal with these current losses.
As Florida and other states pick up the pieces, the US faces serious challenges ahead, and authorities are under pressure to be prepared for when the next disaster strikes. Paul Ging, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Analysis by Zurich-based reinsurance company Swiss Re conducted earlier this year says the US suffers the world's second highest financial toll from weather disasters and pays more in absolute terms than any other country in the world. The report estimates property damage from hurricanes and major storms to cost nearly 0.4% of the nation's GDP every year. That's almost double the damage faced by China and almost quadruple that of Canada. The report suggests weather disasters may drag down the American economy, and that's because those events are pushing up insurance rates and adding to the high cost of living for many Americans. The US experienced $28 billion disasters last year. That's according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The total cost was estimated at $93 billion. The study says only around half of the property damage from recent weather events was insured. Meanwhile, large insurers have halted policies on properties that are in areas at risk of floods or wildfires. And joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Kathy Boffman-McLeod, CEO of Climate Resilience for All. Great to see you, Kathy. So Donald Trump will never miss an opportunity to criticize the Biden administration. But what is your assessment of the U.S. government response? Has it done enough to help the victims of Hurricanes Helene and Milton?
Yes, the Biden administration is doing all that it can and working closely with local electeds and local officials all over the South, North Carolina, specifically on Helene, and in Florida, with officials across the state there. More than $1 billion has been put into communities to help them recover. So yes, this response to these storms is not political. It's not political. So yes, all kinds of federal.
Yeah, I suppose everything will be politicized during the election season, though. You said the Biden administration is doing everything it can, especially in North Carolina. Trump has said the opposite. It's not a coincidence that North Carolina is going to be a very important state in this election.
Yes, and impact to the elections infrastructure is an issue. How will people be able to go to their precincts and vote? And so, yes, you're right. It is an interplay with hurricane season and election season. They do come together.
One of the things that people have been saying is that the Federal Emergency Management Agency or the Disaster Relief Fund are short on funds. Has the government allocated enough money to respond to weather-related disasters?
Well, I think that the size of climate and the damages that we're seeing, I mean, you just cited how many, more than $1 billion, I think you said 28 $1 billion events in the last few years. So is any response sufficient in the face of the acceleration of what we're seeing in extreme heat and storms and fires and floods? We are bringing upon our infrastructure and our citizens all over more than we can handle. And so that is the message on climate action. I mean, that's what we need to be doing, is stop digging a hole, stop burning fossil fuels that are fueling, making the earth and making the oceans hotter, that make these storms bigger. And here we are. So is there enough? No. The action we need to be taking is both reducing the impacts and investing in resilience physically and adapting to.
Is it doing enough around disaster relief planning?
Yes, I mean, it's doing what it can. I mean, the point is, it's bigger than a government can handle or pay for, and it's also a diffuse system of governments. It's the federal government, it's the Congress, it's the FEMA, it's 12 different agencies, but it's the local governments, it's the state governments, and there are also different jurisdictions in there, and they're working together to do this. But I mean, you can look at the damage and say, no, it's not enough. But also you can say, how can any government or systems of government meet the size and profound nature of these storms and these effects? I mean, so the answer is yes and no.
And what about the role of insurance companies? I mean, what can be done about the spiraling insurance costs and the fact that many people are inadequately insured, if at all?
Well, one of the challenges is that regulating insurance is done at the state level. So there is not a federal or national pricing of insurance. And so that function is done by states. And so if you are an elected official and you're setting pricing and policy around insurance, the price of insurance becomes political. And so what you see is that you have prices of insurance that are not risk-based prices, priced on actuarial models. They're priced on the politics. And so then you don't have a match of the price for the risk. And so then everybody ends up paying because you have to put, special assessments, and people who live away from risky areas are paying for risks on the coastlines. However, now these storms have gotten so big, it doesn't matter if you live in the interior because nowhere is safe. This idea of a climate haven is an outdated term. Everybody thought Asheville, North Carolina was a climate haven. I mean, they don't exist.
Kathy Boffman-McLeod, thank you so much for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
China has invested billions of dollars on building infrastructure projects in Pakistan over the past decade. It is the nation's largest creditor, but expanding Beijing's economic influence in developing nations comes with security risks. As elsewhere in Asia and Africa, Chinese workers are increasingly coming under attack in Pakistan. And Western nations accuse Beijing of trapping countries in debt they can't afford to repay. The Chinese Prime Minister reiterated his nation's pledge to boost a multi-billion-dollar economic corridor with Pakistan during a visit to the nation last week. But does the relationship benefit China more than Pakistan, or is it a win-win for both? Fintan Monahan reports.
Li Qiang received an honor guard on his arrival in Pakistan. It's the first visit by a Chinese premier in more than 10 years. The two powers have been strategic partners for decades, but economic ties have deepened in recent years. Under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor Plan, China has invested billions of dollars into Pakistan's infrastructure. Li's visit saw the inauguration of a new airport, hailed by both sides as proof that the partnership is producing results.
International Gwadar Airport, this will not only transform Gwadar's economy particularly, but Pakistan's economy generally.
Gwadar Airport is a symbol of deep developments and cooperation within the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which has produced a significant outcome and played a pivotal role in Pakistan's economic and social development and also regional integration.
China has pumped more than $65 billion into financing infrastructure projects in Pakistan. That includes the port of Gwadar, which both sides hope will eventually become a major trade hub. More investments are planned in railways and the energy sector. But these economic initiatives have faced problems. Pakistan's national debt has topped $250 billion. 13% of that debt is to China. The government is struggling with repayments and recently agreed a $7 billion bailout deal with the IMF. Chinese projects are also facing a backlash. 2 Chinese workers were killed in an attack at Karachi airport just 1 week before Premier Li's visit. Armed groups have been regularly targeting Chinese projects. People in regions like Balochistan say the resources are being exploited and that locals receive little benefit from investments. But despite this, China and Pakistan are determined to push forward, viewing the potential benefits as being worth the risks. Fintan Monahan, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
And joining us now from Karachi in Pakistan is Yusuf Farooq. He is an economist and director of research at Chase Securities. A very warm welcome to the program. So Pakistan's government says that the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is an engine for economic growth, but critics say that it's deepened Islamabad's economic woes. How do you see it?
Thank you for inviting me. So to some extent, you're correct that over the last few years, the debt that Pakistan has accumulated has been a bit of a bother in the last 2 to 3 years. But overall, if we look at Pakistan's total debt, it's 130 billion for an economy of 370, 380 billion. So the overall debt is not that much of an issue. Whenever these assets that Pakistan has built, the infrastructure that Pakistan has built, the power plants that Pakistan has built, whenever they start to get used by the economy as an engine of growth, this debt that Pakistan has taken for these assets is not going to be that much of a problem. What has happened over the last 5 to 6 years is that Pakistan has borrowed money, invested in infrastructure, invested in power plants, but the economy has not grown. So power demand has not grown. The infrastructure has not been used the way that it was intended to be used.
So Yusuf, let me interrupt you there to ask, were some of these projects planned well. If you look at the energy sector debt to China, for example, it's around $16 billion. And some experts have said that by allowing Chinese companies to operate as independent power providers, what Pakistan is doing is paying for capacity rather than production, meaning essentially that people are paying for power that they are not using. Can any country afford that?
See, this is a very normal model for the power sector across the globe. This is exactly like you getting a car for rent. So whoever gives you that car for rent will want a monthly charge, whether you use that car or not. The planning, of course, these decisions, it's easier to criticize some decisions in hindsight. At the point at which these power plants were being built, there was an energy shortage in Pakistan. There was a lot of load shedding going on, but the planning was not perfect. Pakistan has installed extra capacity, but Pakistan does have a single buyer model when it comes to electricity. So only the government is a buyer for electricity. And if you want somebody to set up a power plant, you need to guarantee a return for them to set up that power plant.
Do you think
otherwise there is no other way to set up power plants in Pakistan right now.
Do you think that the debt will become more affordable? What are the prospects for Pakistan's economy?
The debt will definitely become more affordable as these assets get used, as the economy grows. Pakistan is a country of 240 million young people, and the economy, if it's not a crisis situation the way it has been over the last 2-3 years with high inflation, Pakistan's economy does grow at 3, 4, 5%. As the economy keeps growing, and if the current account remains under control, the economy will start growing, and this debt will become a smaller and smaller percentage of GDP as we go on.
And we've talked we've talked about the projects themselves, but I want to ask you about the negotiation of the loans, and if you believe that they were well negotiated, because Pakistan is paying an interest rate of around 3.7% on billions of dollars of loans.
See, if we look at Pakistan's credit rating and the rate at which Pakistan would, in normal circumstances, get loans, so 3.7% is significantly lower than any loan that the country could get right now. So it's important to understand that the point at which these loans were negotiated, Pakistan really needed those power plants, and Pakistan's leadership really thought that they needed those infrastructure projects. So it's very easy to say that those loans were not negotiated properly. But it's also important to understand that once an agreement has been made, it has to be honored. And now Pakistan has to find a way forward along with these agreements.
Well, Pakistan is pushing
and it's also going to be very...
Yeah, it's pushing to delay the repayments in those agreements. Why is Beijing resisting that?
I think an important consideration for most lenders is that if you have lent money to different parties, if one of them comes up to restructure or renegotiate that loan, the other countries that the Chinese have lent to might also ask for the exact same favor, which is why lenders in most situations, even when it's countries lending to each other, or when it's even when it's an institution lending to someone, a large consideration is that they'll have to treat all of the people that they've lent that money to equally. So I think the Chinese are going to resist it, because then countries in Africa could ask for the same treatment. Other countries that the Chinese have lent money to are going to ask for the same treatment.
Okay, and what about the security situation in Pakistan? Chinese nationals working on projects in Pakistan have been killed by armed groups who see the Chinese investment as a threat to their interests. Can Pakistan guarantee the safety of Chinese workers?
It's important to understand that the security situation in Pakistan has been pretty bad since the early 2000s, since the security situation in Afghanistan evolved. But it's also important to understand that gradually the security situation in Pakistan has improved. If we look at the number of terrorist attacks in 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, Pakistan has significantly lesser incidents. The incident that just happened in Karachi was, of course, very unfortunate. And I think the government's going to do everything that they can that something like this is not repeated. This is, of course, unfortunate, and this is no way to get your point across. So I think negotiating with all parties is going to be a significantly better solution, because this terrorism is going to get nobody anywhere.
That is economist Yusuf Farouk joining us live from Karachi. Thank you so much for your perspective. We really appreciate it. The World Bank says Malaysia could reach high-income nation status as early as 2028. The lender has raised the country's growth forecast for this year from 4.3% to 4.9%. Its leading economist, Apurva Sanghi, says higher growth and a strengthening currency is helping to improve living standards for many Malaysians. He's called on the government to push ahead with reforms to ensure the progress continues, including unwinding fuel subsidies. From losing a door plug on a flight to a month-long strike that's disrupted its operations, Boeing has been beset by one problem after another since the start of the year. The quality of its aircraft is under scrutiny, the company is burning through its cash, and its production line is slowing. The American plane maker is now turning to major banks to raise tens of billions of dollars in cash. Its new chief executive says it needs to change how it does business in order to return to its glory days. Ukali Ortberg has announced plans to reduce the company's workforce by 10%. That's around 17,000 jobs. The plane maker is also delaying production of its 777X jetliner, which is already years behind schedule. It will also discontinue the 767 cargo aircraft as part of its overhaul plan. Ortberg singled out the company's poorly performing defence and space businesses as he unveiled the cost-cutting measures. He's warned that more painful action may be needed to get the company back on track. Well, joining us now from Singapore is Graeme Ang. He's an aviation sector analyst and adjunct fellow at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Graeme, always good to speak with you. So, cutting 10% of its workforce, how much trouble is Boeing in?
It's clearly a poor sign of things going on at Boeing right now, and having to cut a non-trivial number of people from its workforce as an immediate measure to try and pivot the company around after a series of mishaps, a series of missteps that have clearly dented the reputation of this juggernaut of a company and also affected the credibility and confidence and trust in what has been an established household name, at least in the aviation industry and also in the global defense sector at large.
So at the time of this recording, around 33,000 workers are still on strike. What impact is this having on the company? The credit ratings agency Standard & Poor's has said that they are putting Boeing on credit watch negative. Could it face a credit rating downgrade as a result?
Very likely, if this carries on. I mean, there's something that needs to be done to turn the boat around. I mean, we ought to empathize with the grievances expressed by the workers who are on the receiving end of things. I mean, fundamentally, this is a very needful reminder to all of us at how important people are. I mean, this is a juggernaut of a defense and aviation company, a global brand at that. And despite the fact that a company of this nature leverages on aviation technology, innovative intellectual property, superb designs, the stuff of aerospace and defense technologies, fundamentally, this is a company that's centered on people. All we have to do is look at the production floor of Boeing and understand how critical people are. And I think if the human capital argument isn't dealt with and the grievances aren't resolved, I think we're going to have compounding problems at Boeing that is simply going to diminish this company further.
Yeah, the problem, one of the biggest criticisms is that in the past few years, it's moved away from people to profits, and that's led to many of the problems, including around safety and security. Boeing employs around 145,000 people in the US. You call it a juggernaut. How important is the company to the country, and is it simply too big to be allowed to fail?
Well, this is a juggernaut of a company that we simply can't ignore. I mean, this company has been around for several decades. It is one of the United States' largest exporters. We're talking about tens of billions of US dollars that contributes to the US trade balance. So in addition to putting a dent on the US economy, it also is going to affect the dominance of the United States of America vis-a-vis Boeing on the international stage.
Graeme, what does the company need to do to turn things around?
What does it need to do? Well, there are several things that it should do. Number one, I think in terms of trying to sort of quell the fire that's going on vis-a-vis the strikes that we're seeing play out for several weeks already, is to really get back to good communications. Some of the things that we're hearing across the industry in terms of industry chatter is that there is an entrenched problem with communications channels at Boeing, which is simply deepening the divide between workers and management. I think it's time for Boeing to put the concerns of workers back on the table, have workers involved in the decision-making processes at Boeing, and have discussions about how the working conditions and the unfair wages at that need to be addressed at Boeing for workers to come back to the production floor and to do what they do best. The second thing, I think, is to look at other ways to trim costs, one of which, of course, would be to sell off non-performing assets. The other one would be to divest non-core businesses. There is some fat that I think that can be trimmed from Boeing. For example, on the defense side of the house, Boeing has been an established player in legacy defense systems. These defense systems, be it the F-15, for example, is something of the past. And as consumers turn towards next generation systems, I think that's where Boeing should put its money at, in terms of cutting edge research and development, looking at next generation systems, and also sustainable technologies as well, both in the defense and non-defense domains.
Graeme Ang, thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Google has signed a deal to use small nuclear reactors to power its artificial intelligence data centers. The company says it will start using the first reactor this decade and bring more online by 2035. The US tech giant has ordered 7 small nuclear reactors from California's Kairos Power. Data centers consume around 3% of the world's electricity. Tech companies are increasingly looking to nuclear energy to meet their demands. And that is our show for this week. Get in touch with us on X. I'm at Liz Puranam, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. And there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. And that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. From the whole team, thank you for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.